Eric, are you ready to start your portion and let us know what that is and maybe where you're going with it?
Sure thing. And I'll have screen shares to share. And be proud of me. I practiced and I actually whittled this down for time's sake, and more on that. But basically, looking at a thought on the 70 weeks playing out in real time, and then a look at the Antichrist, a speculation of how the Antichrist, one way he might be coming out through current events to be fulfilling things. So that's going to be the bulk of my contribution.
Okay, go for it.
Alrighty, let me start with sharing my screen here, and I want that right there. Can y'all see this okay? It should be basically a blank screen at the moment.
Yes, we can see it.
Alrighty. So, and I appreciate you all indulging my heresy as I work things out. I go with what I understand to be the best answers from the different options that I've seen, and until I learn better, and then I adapt as I go. So for this, so out of courtesy for today's other presenters, I actually practiced this presentation. I have it down to 20 minutes or so. So if you kindly hold your questions or applause until the end, I'll be all done, out of the way, and then whatever time you want to spend on thoughts and questions for me, or move on ahead to the others, is all up to you and a-okay with me.
Eric, we
So
might say people can also make a comment or question in the chat if you don't want to speak online, or you can raise your hand down at the bottom,
sure,
and
absolutely. And
and so
I'll
we
ask you
can organize things a little bit.
Thank you. And I'll ask you to kindly moderate that while I'm focusing on presenting here. I appreciate that very much. Don't want to miss anyone's thoughts or questions. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So kind of clearing the stage here on the 70 weeks. Um, Whatever our own interpretations and understanding, we all know Antichrist is going to do all kinds of evil, which of course Christ has not done and he will not do. And it's definitely not my intention to offend any sensibilities on that. I'm actually simply presenting what appear to be impartial, independent facts. Now, whatever the implications or interpretations of all this may be, that's open to discussion, and that's actually not my focus here. So I'm going to ask all of you, set all of that subjective aside for the moment, and for now, just consider the objective dates and numbers. And if anyone has biblical chapter or verse proving any of these figures wrong, I heartily welcome that so I can correct it accordingly. So here we go. So the common mainstream thought. Let me move this up here. Can y'all see the timeline down there at the bottom of the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the common mainstream thought is that Herod died in 4 BC. And that has led most to naturally assume Christ died and rose again in AD 29. However, the preponderance of evidence actually shows that Herod died in 1 BC. All the copies of Josephus from AD 1544 and prior show him dying in 1 BC. He associates a blood moon eclipse with Herod's death. That requires a 100% eclipse, which did not happen in the year 4 BC. It did happen in 1 BC. I also have an article that I can send out to everyone afterwards that goes deep dive into Herod's death actually being 1 BC. So preponderance of evidence shows that. The preponderance of evidence also shows Jesus died on Friday, April 3rd, AD 33. It was a Friday. It was Passover, Nisan the 14th, before the next day, which was a Sabbath, which was a high day because it was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It also had the blood moon that required the 100% eclipse that happened. It also had the earthquake. We have the evidence of the earthquake in that year. None of that happens with the year 29. Now, I remain open-minded, no personal attachments to any of this, but no one has yet been able, with Bible chapter and verse, to disprove to me either of those dates. These dates and their supporting evidence are 100% independent of each other. Neither one feeds the other. The fact, let's move on down here now. The fact that the Bible timeline of Christ's life falls perfectly within those independent data points is its own huge piece of independent corroborating evidence. So there's that right there. So now let's talk 70 weeks of years. 70 weeks of years from what? From the decree of Artaxerxes, Ezra 713, year 458 BC. Okay, so here's years, here's weeks. So as we're going on across here. So to quickly address some questions that immediately arise. Right. The Hebrew does not state a covenant is made with a duration of 1 week. It actually says in or during this 1 week, a covenant is made. For example, the Douay Rheims Bible states, and he shall confirm the covenant with many in 1 week. So within the 70th week, fast forward over here, there we go, ta-da. So within the 70th week, Jesus made a covenant with many. He said, this is my blood of the covenant shed for many. Now, a lot of folks would say that Christ's death and resurrection in AD 29 can't be the middle of the 70th week because nothing major happens 3.5 years later at the end of the week. I agree with that 100%, but I agree with that because Jesus died in AD 33. So that's not what happened in the middle of the week in AD 29. What happened there, per John 1, verse 29, John the Baptist, in priestly authority, declared Christ to be the Lamb that takes away sin, thereby nullifying sacrifices. This was in AD 29, the middle of the week, the second half being Christ's 3.5-year ministry until AD 33, when he died and rose again at the end of the 70th week. The supposed future first half of the week is nowhere in Revelation, nor is there any mention of those 3.5 years before the tribulation. A quote from Brother Worski's book on Revelation. On page 64, he says, the last week, treaty with Israel, there's no verse in Revelation that confirms this. Now, because we clearly see Antichrist activity described that sure sounds like the 70th week stuff, we've assumed the running stopwatch countdown must have hit a pause, that it's still under right now. But no one has yet been able to show me anywhere in the text of Daniel 9 that absolutely declares such a pause. It says Messiah gets cut off. It doesn't say the countdown clock does. Now, it could be the case, but a strict reading of Daniel 9 doesn't require it. Jesus dying and resurrecting in the 490th year at the end of the 70th week, since the decree of Artaxerxes, does not take one iota away from everything we all believe about the Antichrist. In fact, if we think back to Ezekiel and Isaiah, Ezekiel 28 or Isaiah 14, I sometimes get the numbers mixed up, where it starts talking about one person, but then it's obviously expanded to talk about Satan. So to Daniel, we could certainly see it having implications, some that might relate to Antiochus, but then going on to the Antichrist. So clearly it expands from there. So none of this about the timing with Jesus here, none of this takes away from all that we understand about the Antichrist. In fact, it actually adds to Antichrist's motive to desecrate Christ's original 70th week. I'm not stopping anyone from calling the end times week the 70th week. I'll probably still end up doing that myself. But everything we all agree on about the Antichrist doesn't change the simple math that Christ's ministry happened in the 70th week since the decree. The fact that the 490 years fit perfectly within the Bible time span of Christ's life, which falls perfectly within those two independent data points of the death of Herod and the death and resurrection of Christ, that's another huge piece of independent corroborating evidence. Now, we can feel free to chalk all this up to mere coincidence if that's anyone's comfort, but the simple math is the simple math. And really, that's my only point here. Again, the implications of all this are a separate topic, the subject at hand is only the simple math. And if anyone can disprove that simple math with Bible chapter and verse, again, I welcome it. I will happily adjust for it accordingly. So far, no one has, and that's my only point with that. So now I'll segue to the Antichrist stuff. So I'll stop that share. And now I want to share my other screen. So I'll go to share again. And now we'll go to this. Okay, go to that. Can everyone see Google Earth?
Yes.
All righty. So now to go to some fun speculation. So the Antichrist, last of the anti-Semites, one of the first were Esau's descendants. I don't see her here. Esau's descendants, the Amalekites. The Amalekites got around. They became the early Hyksos foreign leaders of Egypt after its 13th dynasty collapse, thanks to the Exodus events. Amalekites are one of 10 mentioned in Psalm 83 in some of Brother Howard's supporting documents that he's had prior. We know the Antichrist rises as one from 10, so hey, 10% chance he's an Amalekite. The Amalekites only arrived in Egypt after they had spread to Rephidim, where they fought Israel. So here they are in Rephidim. A chance to open there, Rock and Horeb, and all that. So Rephidim, like Mount Sinai, just over, which is in the Jabal Azur, Rephidim, like Mount Sinai, is in Saudi Arabia. So Antichrist, Amalekite, Saudi Arabia. By the way, the DNA of modern Palestinians shows Saudi Arabia origin. Think the birth and spread of Islam. So modern Palestinians and ancient Amalekites both hail from Saudi Arabia. I think of Revelation as a sequel to Exodus, and like all sequels, on a bigger and grander scale than the original. Revelation is an incredibly Jewish book, far more Old Testament references than New. The Gospels and the epistles in between are like a gateway to all of that. It took Jesus' first coming to launch everything, the Lamb worthy to open the scrolls that bring all this stuff out. So, okay, so Antichrist, Amalekite, Saudi Arabia, right? Both Osama bin Laden and his son Hamza were born in Saudi Arabia, which later revoked Hamza's citizenship. Could the bin Ladens have Amalekite blood? The Amalekites made it at least as far as Iran by the time of Esther. Thank you for referencing Mordecai. Of course, Haman, Susa in Persia, which also claims to have the tomb of Daniel, the man of the hour. So by the time of Esther, the Amalekites had made it into Iran. Well, as far as these traveling folks, Amalekites go, so here's Iran. Well, just next door on the right is Syria. Relocates to Afghanistan to foster and support the eventual king of the north. Remember Netanyahu's black map that was referenced earlier. As mentioned, his black missed Turkey, but it also missed Afghanistan, home of Al-Qaeda, the base. Now, not many have heard of Hamza, Osama's son number 15 out of 20. Hamza rises from obscurity. Osama bin Laden's letter to the U.S. after 9/11 cited our support of Israel and Israel's perceived interest in the Temple Mount as part of the reason for the 9/11 attack. His letter about 9/11 got renewed interest after October 7th, 2023. On September 14th, 2019, the first Trump administration announced Hamza had been killed in a drone strike sometime in the 2 years prior. He's actually today the current head of Al-Qaeda and is married into Taliban elite. So, as will later happen with Antichrist, Hamza was dead, but has recovered quite well. So has Al-Qaeda, the base. Like Satan, they do their best work when people no longer believe in them. Unfortunately, them being alive and well just doesn't fit some people's narrative, agenda, or tunnel vision. So they get away with it. One of the many enemies released from U.S. custody is today the current head of Taliban intelligence, Abdul Haq Wasiq. Biden's ambassador to Afghanistan, Karen Decker, is extremely pro-Taliban. Trump kept her on. Our official source of U.S. intelligence on Afghanistan is the Taliban. Now, the Israel attack was intended for years earlier, but momentum was set back by successful drone strikes in Trump's first term. The fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban in 2021 enabled the Israel attack in 2023, now falling on the Yom Kippur War Jubilee. Was a spiritual hand at work behind the scenes orchestrating the delayed timing in order to be a spiritual sign. FYI, Russia on Israel for earlier as a distraction from Ukraine. They knew. Now, though it was planned for years prior, the October 7th, 2023 event was now able to be claimed to be justified by the perceived threat of the recent September 2022 arrival of 5 red heifers from Texas, as well as attempts by some to have Passover in 2023 at the Temple Mount. All were done with an eye on the Temple Mount's perceived role in end times. When it comes to the end times Temple Mount, what Christians think, and stay with me here, even what God himself thinks is actually irrelevant. Or put it another way, we can debate and discuss the end times temple amongst ourselves all we want. I frankly don't see the Antichrist asking our opinion. The only question is, what does the Antichrist, the enemy, think about the end times Temple Mount? That was the trigger of everything else. 9/11, October 7th, which was Israel's 9/11, future attacks, and where the Antichrist, will take his seat. That's going to be the deciding factor, where he sees, what he thinks the temple is. Even if he's wrong, it's what he thinks and sees that's going to decide it. So bringing this into the present, Hamza is now funding the current group in power in Syria. A lot of these discussions were launched after what happened in Syria. So Hamza is funding them. This group in Syria was trained in Afghanistan. Hamza has vowed to avenge his father's death. Under the banner of the Islamic army of Imam Mahdi, their end-time Messiah, there are around 120,000 fighters, which is 40 times the almost 3,000 used on October 7th. A sea of people, a flood to devour in the desert. A beast? The October 7 invasion was called Operation Tufan. Tufan is Arabic for flood, matching the Greek Potoman from Revelation 12. Al-Qaeda has successfully banded together many former rivals. Under Taliban protection, Al-Qaeda has scientists from Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan, and North Korea all working side by side in Afghanistan. Revelation 17:17. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. Is there a potential connection with allegiance to Al-Qaeda, the base, and to this beast? By the way, Benghazi was Al-Qaeda. Afghanistan fell in August of 2021. Just 2 months later, in November of 2021, the overthrow was planned in Afghanistan, which just recently transpired. 4 months after that, in March 2022, the Israel attack was finalized in Afghanistan. The date of October 7th was picked because that was the launch date of Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan in 2001. Obviously, again, we see the Yom Kippur Jubilee there. In Syria, they are feigning moderation to gain favor, just like fellow anti-Semite Adolf Hitler did, and to gain time to consolidate before going after Israel. The Taliban is doing the same, maintaining diplomatic ties with cutouts in terrorist connections so they can claim plausible deniability, happy to let others take credit. Like the Antichrist's first 3.5 years of peace in his time, they're biding time and preparing. As we know, Erdogan in Turkey, supporting these new powers in Syria, wants to revive the Ottoman Empire, which held the Promised Land from 1517 to 1917. As prophesied, the land of Israel is in the common crosshairs of many. Each of the Ezekiel 38 and 39 nations helped provide money and or material for the October 7, 2023 invasion. October 7th was a trial run. There is a planned attack on the US plus 4 European countries in 2025. Their training is complete. They are already here in the US, as are their weapons. None have been apprehended to date. We currently have over 1,000 Taliban deep cover operatives among us, plus likely the same amount from Al-Qaeda. This coming attack is greatly enabled by both the Afghanistan withdrawal and the prior open border policies. Think of this. If it was spiritually necessary for these events to unfold, we would have needed leadership in place that would have allowed both. Was a spiritual hand at work again, even in the 2020 election? So this pending 2025 event likely too far set in motion to be stopped at this point. Likely targets include Tel Aviv, Paris, London, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Half of America's Somalian Muslim population is there. Somalia is the next target for jihadi takeover. So independent splinter group cells of 5 to 7 each will be given the simultaneous command to attack in all these cities at once. Targets will be high-density sites like mass transit, airports, train bus stations, hotels, venues, as well as first responder stations in order to hinder rescue efforts. Many attackers will even be disguised as first responders. They'll seek to establish long-term autonomous zones to wear us down. The casualties on 9/11 were almost 3,000. Casualty estimates for the 2025 event are 10 times that, in the 30 to 40,000s. Goals include inciting others to join in the anarchy, furthering the wedge between people and government. On one hand, blaming the attack on a government that's decentralizing. On the other hand, seeing a revival of COVID-type government overreach in a knee-jerk response. Like 9/11, it will also trigger a major crash of the already fragile economy. Defense Secretary Hegseth has been briefed on all this since taking office, as has Florida Governor DeSantis. Now, could this 2025 event be the trigger for the End Times Peace Treaty, launching the 7-year countdown? Can you all see this screen okay?
Yes.
I'm good there. In 2029, the church will be 2,000 years old, for those who are fans of looking at things in 1,000-year blocks. So the church will be 2,000 years old in 2029. Could the Matthew 24 budding of the fig tree be the rebirth of Israel? Psalm 90, verse 10. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years. By 2029, the generation born when Israel was reborn will all have turned 80. My dad, born in 1948, will be 80 when 2029 starts. Could this generation that was alive for that prophetic rebirth of Israel be the prophesied this generation that will not pass until all these things are fulfilled? If 2029 were to be the midweek Great Tribulation kickoff, what's 3.5 years prior to that, which would be the launch of the whole 7 years? 2029 minus 3.5 years is mid-2025. Maybe just enough time to build a temple. 2029 is also a Sabbath year. Now, apart from the items that are confirmed human intelligence on the ground, the whole spiritual interpretation presented here is only speculation. Could all amount to nothing, with nothing coming of it. So, final thoughts, while I was getting excited putting all together and seeing the possible Amalekite connection, I came across this. Back in 2023, a few weeks after the attack, Netanyahu said, "We must remember what Amalek has done to you," says our Holy Bible. and we do remember. So, and he also said, we fight an eternal fight against the evil spirit of Amalek. So that thought has been there. Last thought. It's been said that back in the day, the thought was that the coalition of Antichrist would be amassed from the European Union, the watered down Christian nations, whatever. And more recently, the thought has been, okay, the Antichrist coalition is going to come from the Muslim groups. Well, I say to that, the way things are heading right now, is there going to be a difference? This is a Babylon Bee headline. Trump assures PM Starmer England is still his favorite Muslim country. So could be by the time things all play, the Muslim influence in Europe is going to be so great that it's really going to not matter whether it's Europe or the jihadi Muslims. It's all going to be the same thing. So those are my thoughts, and I will stop the share and open it back up to y'all.
Thank you, Brother Cooper. One thing I was thinking of, this is certainly no slight for you, it's actually a compliment, is that I've learned through the years when I'm watching or listening to one of Brother Eric's presentations, especially on history that includes dates and events, is I'm glad it's recorded, because there's so much information that you need to go back over and listen to it again, because he threw out a lot of dates and facts and places and names and all that you can't really take in all of it at the time. And he has many of his lessons on PowerPoint presentations. You can contact him for him to send them to you so that you can take your own time and research them. I apologize for limiting him to time because it forced him to try to pack in a lot in a short time, and appreciate all the details. One thing I would like to bring up just in general, and I think most of us have considered if the being cut off after the 69th week or in the 70th week, as he said. And so he said not so much a 70th week separated from the 69, but a continuation from the 69, no break. And we've all tried to consider, are the details of that 70th week primarily about Christ and his death, or are they primarily about the Antichrist and his plans during the tribulation? And Eric has presented that there's some of both. So I kind of like that approach. One thing that has it's caused me to think, I apply it more deeply maybe to the Antichrist, Daniel 9:27, is that the companion passages in Daniel, which would be 11:31 and 12:11, and even in chapter 8, 11 through 13, all the companion passages connected to 9:27, 9:26 and 27, combine the ending of the sacrifices and the abomination of desolation to be two events that are tied together and by the same person. And especially in 11:31 and 12:11, they seem to be clearly connected to an evil prince, not the Messiah prince. And I know Eric has thought these things through, but the ending of the daily sacrifices in 11:31 and 12:11 are always combined with the abomination of desolation and done by someone not good but evil. And how have you reconciled that, Eric? Are you there?
Okay, yeah, sorry, I lost my audio I lost my speaker as soon as I
Oh, okay.
participation.
So
So I
the
had,
emphasis to me on those verses seems to be more of an evil prince, not a good prince. How do you reconcile it still being Christ in the cross?
for me, I reconcile it in the fact, again, I think what it is, it's referring to what the Antichrist is going to do in reaction and response to what Christ did. My thing with the numbers has nothing to do with the implication. It seems those numbers happened, and that just seems to be a fact. And it's the Antichrist knowing that he's going to do all of his evil. I don't think Christ is doing anything evil, like I said from the beginning. I think all the evil Antichrist does is to mock and undo what Christ did that happened to fall mathematically within the 70th literal week. I
Okay,
think there's an actual anti-spirit week that's going to be taking place in response to the literal simple math week that Christ lived out.
Can I say something real quick?
sure.
Yeah, I agree with Eric, of course, but I think part of the problem is for that interpretation, and I'm not too dogmatic about it, but I lean towards with Eric, is right after the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. I do believe that's the Messiah, but right after that brings the thought it's going to be on the wing of abominations, which how do you connect that? And as you're doing your exegesis of this, it's important to really consider those things, because what is that talking about? If it's Jesus and he got rid of things, it seems to be on a wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate. That's not talking about Christ.
I
So
think
yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the traps we fall into is we pendulum swing. It's either all Christ or it's all Antichrist. And
Right.
it's not
Again,
about
right.
cherry picking what's convenient.
Right.
It's about seeing what honestly relates to one, what honestly expounds to the other. Again, going back to Ezekiel and Isaiah, talking about a human king, then all of a sudden they're talking about Satan, and they're talking about
Right.
things that clearly don't relate to the human king. So I think here it's kind of like how Christ's ministry was telescoped, and the prophets didn't necessarily know it at the time, first coming and second coming. They just saw what the Messiah was going to do. I think too, with the literal 70 weeks of Christ's ministry, and then the end times, a week, if we will, that the Antichrist is going to do. I think sometimes we forget that there's that distinction. Here's what Christ did in his, and now here's what Antichrist is going to do in his, especially in response to literally be anti-Christ.
Right, certainly
Right.
he is the false Christ trying to imitate to some degree what Christ did. Let's just focus maybe on 12:11 of Daniel and uh, try to clarify maybe what it's saying, because in 12:11, from the time that the daily sacrifice, and that daily is the word tamid, it's the word for normal daily sacrifice of that time, and the abomination is desolation is set up. So again, they seem to be tied closely together as the same unfolding event. There should be 1,290 days, or close to the 1260. We've discussed why the 30 days difference, but we're talking about that, in my mind, last 3.5 year period leading up to the return of Christ. And that daily sacrifice being taken away, in my mind, cannot be speaking about Christ and the cross, but it's connected to someone who's also committing the abomination of desolation. And that
No,
from
I
that
think I think
time,
I
there's
think
going to be 1,290 days, which is the end of the tribulation and the return of Christ. So I don't see how that could be applied to the death of Christ.
yeah, I
And
don't think
on
that I
that,
don't think
go ahead,
that's
Brother Foster.
applying. Oh, go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry.
I would say again, everything we believe about the Antichrist, I agree with. I just don't see that changing the math of what happened, how Christ timed out. I think there are things that speak to what the Antichrist is going to be doing. Where you're quoting Daniel there, I agree completely. Everything we say about the Antichrist, I'm on board with.
So
I just don't see that.
would 12:11 in any way apply to what Christ did on the cross? Or
No, I think just like with Ezekiel and Isaiah, where it expands, it's left the king behind, and now it's talking about Satan. I think now it's expanded, and now we're talking about the Antichrist. We've moved on from Christ's literal, and now
so
we're seeing what
12:11 is not speaking of the same thing as 9:27.
exactly we're talking about the Antichrist in the future versus what Christ did in the literal in that time.
Well, if we
And
go,
Eric, you see as that on 12:11, that would be what's happening there in chapter 11 with
11:31.
yeah, like in that part, right? Now, do you now me and brother Rick, we don't see it the same way. I still see that as before Christ with uh, Antiochus, or however you say his name, going all the way down to 35. I don't know if you divide it the same way, but I believe that the literal abomination happened before Christ, and it typifies what's going to happen eventually, right? What do you think? How do you handle chapter 11? How do you divide that?
For me, rather than deep diving into that, not to skirt the responsibility, for me, I'm open minded to anything on that. Anything that can be determined on that, from my perspective, does not change the math of the dates. Even if there's no spiritual significance or no connotations or interpretations we can assign to it, I simply see the math as the math that happened. And so I haven't seen anything to show me that didn't happen. Everything we
Well, I
say
mean,
about the Antichrist doesn't change what happened with Christ.
but
And so,
chapter 12 verse 11, do you see that as still future, or do you think that has already been fulfilled, but not, it's not going? Do you think that's talking about Christ, or do you feel that's already been fulfilled prior to Christ?
I think there are potential applications, not to take the
Right.
easy way out. I'm open minded. I could say, obviously, we know there are some type and foreshadowing with Antiochus the Fourth. We know that ultimately it's all going to be the Antichrist. So I'm not dogmatic on any of that.
It has to be future. It has to
Mhm.
be future. Jesus said in 24:15 of Matthew, yet future, when you see what Daniel was talking about
Uh-huh.
regarding the abomination of desolation, it was an event not yet fulfilled. So whatever Antiochus was only a prefigure of what the Antichrist will do, Jesus making it yet future.
Yep, that,
Yeah.
and I'm completely good
Yeah.
with that. And my only point is that doesn't change the math or the numbers of Christ's week and how that literally fit in relation to.
Okay, instead of getting too bogged down here, because I'd love to talk about this all day, and I appreciate the information Eric put out.